All right, everybody. Jacob Sundstrom, the managing editor of fearthefin.com, here with Marcus White, staff writer at fearthefin.com. Kind of calling it this is our usual day, I guess, so we were just late before. We're going to talk a little bit about the big news of the day, obviously being the Kevin Labanc call-up, in addition to talking about the big news of the weekend, which was the Sharks getting shit canned by the Pittsburgh Penguins. So let's start with the Labanc news. I wrote something. Well, I wrote it last night. Went up this morning about whether or not it was the right move for the Sharks to call up Labanc, and apparently the Sharks thought yes, that it was time. Time to call him up. But my reasoning in the article was basically that if they're not going to play Matt Nieto, then yes, they should call up Kevin Labanc. And I think that this probably tells us a lot about what they think of Matt Nieto at this point. Spoiler alert, not a whole lot. So I think that now Labanc joins the team. The team goes on a 6-game road trip. I assume that he's going to play because otherwise there's no reason to call him up. And that would be much more reckless and stupid than calling up Ryan Carpenter to sit in the press box, of course. And I think that's why we saw Ryan Carpenter before and we're seeing Kevin Labanc now. So I guess let's start with what's your initial reaction to the news of the call-up. I assume surprised. I was definitely a little surprised.
Yeah, I think reading between the lines of what DeBoer said to us yesterday at the Sharks' last practice before they went on the road trip, I think I had an inclination that it was going to be Labanc. I just didn't think they'd actually do it. He talked about, it's about merit. He spoke very highly of how Labanc played. He was also asked about Labanc as opposed to other players. But, the way they talked about how they determined players are going to get called up, reading between the lines, it seemed like Labanc was the choice. You really can't argue, I think, with him getting this chance. He's got 10 points in 6 games. I think he leads all rookies in the AHL in points per game. Among players that have played at least 4 games, he's tied for second in points per game with Nikolai Goldobin. For people who have followed the Barracuda a little more closely, and some of the other writers have talked to, they say that Labanc's been legit. He's been the real deal so far. I also don't think they make this, like you alluded to, Jake, they don't make this move unless he's going to play. I don't think they call him up unless he's going to, play and get a chance in that lineup. It might not be tomorrow against Washington because, they're traveling. They haven't had a practice yet. They might wait to get him, practicing with his teammates. But, he did see some time with Chris Tierney and Melker Karlsson, from what I recall in the preseason. And, he could probably slide back with that, with Tierney, I'm sure. I think, we could talk about where we see him fitting into the lineup. I don't think they're going to call him up to play him, maybe 10 minutes a night. I think they'll give him a pretty regular chance. They might not put him right on, the second unit power play, but I think, I don't think they make this move for what they've talked about. And, DeBoer's emphasized that they don't have to rush anybody. They're not in a position where they need to, bring guys along because they have capable NHL players. Taking into account everything they've said to this point, they don't make this move unless he's going to play. Now, having said that, I still would not be surprised if he doesn't play a whole lot on this road trip, especially if, the Sharks catch fire with their NHL light options ahead of him. But, it's good news for him, and it's good news for the Sharks. It's really exciting for the Sharks to have a young player like this up on the team. I can't recall, a mid-season call-up who's had as much hype as, Labanc has right now, maybe since Logan Couture. And I mean, maybe the next one closest to him, closest to Couture, would have been when Tommy Wingels was first getting call-ups to the team, as long ago as that seems. So, this is definitely exciting for the Sharks, and, it's exciting for Kevin Labanc. Now it's time to see what he can do. Where do you think he's going to slide into the lineup, if at all?
Yeah, I think that they probably put him on the 4th line because I think that that's really where they see the hole in the lineup. That being said, you see this weekend practicing, kind of putting their lines in a blender yesterday, that they're not opposed to the idea, I think, of really putting him anywhere. Quite frankly, wouldn't be shocked to see him play with the Joes. I wouldn't be shocked to see him play with Couture. Nothing would surprise me really at this point. And I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to putting him anywhere, because I think that the fact that he's a gifted scorer kind of makes him a good fit for really either of those top two lines because you're playing with a good center, and I think that's going to be something that's going to be important. I wouldn't hate to see Labanc and Donskoy and Couture play together and then put Bodker on the top line. I wouldn't hate to see Labanc on the top line with the Joes. And I think it would be fine, at least at first, to put him on the fourth line with Tierney and Carlson, because I honestly don't really feel like that's a fourth line by traditional, standards. I think that's a fourth line that, has guys that can score. Tierney's a pretty good playmaker. Labanc is a great scorer. Carlson is a really good all-around player. And I don't think that that's a bad fourth line. I know the traditional wisdom being that we don't want to put our prospects on the fourth line and have them play 7 or 8 minutes a night. But that being said, if they play well enough, they're not going to just play 7 or 8 minutes a night,
Right.
And DeBoer's not afraid to do that, to roll all four lines. That's what they want to do. They just haven't had the fourth line that have been good enough, at least in their opinion, to actually make that happen. So I think I think it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. I think he'll start on the fourth line. Where he finishes, and by finishes I mean where he's at in 5-10 games. That's maybe a whole different thing. To me, the most interesting thing about this is what it's going to do to the rest of the roster, quite frankly, because while, I already said this is not great news for Matt Nieto, it's not good news for Tommy Wingels either. Tommy Wingels is the guy with the biggest cap hit. That's the guy that the contract they want to get rid of. That's the guy. That would be the guy. If I had to target one guy on the roster to boot, that it's him. And the fact is that it could be very bad for both of them. The reality is that if Labanc comes up and he scores, even just a little bit, if he scores 3 points on this 6-game road trip, that's probably, especially on a fourth line role or whatever, that's enough to keep him around. And then you fast forward 3 months to when Timo Meier joins the team. Guess what? That's 2 call-ups, and that's Nieto and Wingels, not sticking around anymore. And I think that's interesting. And I also think that the Dylan DeMello thing is going to come back into the spotlight here pretty soon, because he's just rotting away up in the press box. Isn't it good enough to play for the NHL team? Can't send him down.
Yeah.
There are moves coming, trades, hopefully. That would be the preference. It would really suck to waive some of these guys and lose them for nothing, because they would be gone.
Yeah, I think, I'm looking right now at Natural Stat Trick. His most common line mate during the preseason, played 22 minutes with him, was Chris Tierney among forwards. He did play a little over 10 minutes with Tomas Hertl. So, maybe that third line is a spot, and you slide some guys up. I think, the exciting thing is that it gives the Sharks a lot more flexibility. And DeBoer talked about that yesterday, how they can afford to move guys around the lineup because they have a lot of interchangeable parts and guys that can play up and down the lineup. He talked about Bodker being a guy that they're just as comfortable slotting him on the third line as they are on the top line. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see how DeBoer uses, his young players. And I think he's shown, I think DeBoer got a little bit of a bad rap for the Adam Larson situation in New Jersey. But I think DeBoer's shown in this year in San Jose that if a young player gains his trust, they will play. Jonas Donskoy gained his trust, and Jonas Donskoy played. Jonas Donskoy was older than a typical rookie, but he established himself at the NHL level and established a regular role. So I think, if Labanc can show to DeBoer and the coaching staff that he's a capable 3-zone player, and that he can chip in offensively, then I think he's going to have a chance for a regular role. I think, I look at his call up to the road trip almost like a trial run. They're going to see, he may or may not stay with them when they come home and play against New Jersey 2 weeks from today. Not actually sure who he grew up rooting for, but I know he played, youth hockey in New Jersey. So that'd be probably pretty cool for him if he played his first home game with the Sharks against the New Jersey Devils. But we don't know if he's going to stay up with the team beyond that. So I think it's going to depend on performance, and he's going to be given an opportunity to show that he can stick with the team. But I agree with you. It creates a bit of a jam in terms of contract. I checked Cap Friendly today. The Sharks have just a little over $10,000 in salary cap space right now. And, cap space works. You can accumulate more for the deadline if you have space on each day. It's all very confusing to me. And, there are people who know more that have written more about it. But, So it's going to be interesting to see what this logjam creates. And, you mentioned Dylan DeMello, and yesterday DeBoer was asked about Dylan DeMello, and he said they're happy with the play of their 6 defensemen, and they don't really want to make a change back there yet. It's been interesting to me that he hasn't mixed up his pairings. I think in a lot of the underlying metrics, the pairings have been pretty good. And obviously the team is allowing such few shots on goal and is doing a really good job at suppressing shots that I think that's probably why, you told me that yesterday off air, that's probably a big reason why they're staying together. So I wonder what it's going to take for Dylan DeMello to get into the lineup, because, it's getting to the point where, he's probably got to play, some games here pretty quickly. And, I would have thought he would have had a chance to get into this lineup even as a 7th defenseman, but now, with them carrying 2 extra forwards, and if they scratched a forward and carried a 7th defenseman, you'd have 3 forwards in the press box. I don't really recall DeBoer doing that last year, and I now really can't see that happening with Kevin Labanc called up. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because I agree with you. If he plays well enough, it's gonna force their hand and force them to make some maybe a little uncomfortable roster decisions.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. I think the going back to DeBoer for a second, I think that it's kind of unfair to lay the blame for a lot of roster decisions, even in the Adam Larson situation, on DeBoer. Lou Lamoriello did everything there, and so it's hard to separate the two things, And so I think since he's been here, it's been okay. That being said, the Sharks haven't really had, there hasn't been a, a Connor McDavid or a Austin Matthews or a William Nylander. The Sharks don't have guys like that. They have, Kevin Labanc, right?
Yeah.
Which isn't to put down Kevin Labanc as much as to say these are not guys that you say, well, obviously he's making the team. Well, these are guys that have to prove that they belong in order to make the team. That's the way it should work. So I think that the way that they've handled this so far has been pretty good. And I don't know. I'm excited that the team is willing to give some of their young guys a shot, but I also think that this. I think the reason they're calling him up is pretty clearly because they're not scoring enough, and I think that that's kind of interesting too, because I think you look at the numbers and it really just seems mostly like bad luck. And especially given how poor the division is this year, I wouldn't say that it's time to make a panic move. And I'm not necessarily saying that's what this is, but I think it's interesting given the history of the way the Sharks have been run. This is kind of unusual for them. And I think that there maybe is something to be said for the idea that they feel like they're not as good a shooting team as they used to be also. And I think that, again, goes back to the Patrick Marleau thing, which, is – it's one of those things where the future of Patrick Marleau is intrinsically related to literally every single decision made by this team going forward. And I think that says a lot about what they think of the kind of the makeup of the team that they're calling up a scorer. Because that's what Kevin Labanc is. I think he's a fine two-way player, whatever, but they're calling him up to score goals. That's what they want. That's what they feel like the team is missing right now. I mean, they're right. They're, like we talked about yesterday, they're allowing the second fewest shots in the NHL. They're top 10 in scoring chances against, in the good way, not in the bad way, to be clear. They're creating more scoring chances than anybody in the NHL, or they're top 5 in scoring chances. Per 60. I mean, this team should be scoring more. And I think that they look at the way that they have the line set up. The fact that they are still sticking with Hurdle at the third line center shows to me they see what the weakness in that line is. And again, like we talked about earlier, it wasn't Chris Tierney when he was there. The weakness is that Patrick Marleau's not scoring. And so that line doesn't really have a true scorer right now. Even when Ward's there, that guy's not there to score a bunch of goals, really. He's there to kind of fulfill the role that Tomas Hertl had on the top line, chase down pucks, to make hits, to be a nuisance. So that line kind of needs a score. And now that I say this, I'm talking myself into putting Kevin Labanc on the third line.
Yeah.
So, it wouldn't be a bad decision, really.
I think that'd be a good fit. And then you could You know,
the handedness is messed up, so you have to move Ward also probably if you put a Hurdle there because Labanc and Ward are both right wingers, I believe.
Ward skated with the Joes.
Oh, that's okay.
He skated on the top line. So the way the lines looked yesterday was Ward, Thornton, Pavelski, Donskoy, Couture, Carlson, Bodker.
That's weird.
Bodker, Hurdle, Marleau, which has the potential to be a very fast line. And even if you put Labanc there, that line's going to play at a breakneck pace. And then the fourth line was unchanged with Nieto, Tierney, Wingels, and Micheal Haley rotating in those spots. So I think, Labanc, I agree with you. He's, they need to score. And I think they're looking at this as a spark. It almost reminds me of, we talk about the last time there was maybe this much hype for a prospect was when Couture was getting called up. But it really reminds me of the, 08, 09, 09, 10, Sharks. Like when they would look for a spark, they would call up, they'd call up somebody from Worcester. They called up Ben Ferrio. They called up Jamie McGinn. They called up Logan Couture. Couture ended up sticking. McGinn ended up working his way out of Todd McClellan's doghouse enough. And, even Ben Ferrio saw time in some playoff games. So I think, I think
a big playoff goal even.
He did. Yeah. I think they feel that their prospect pool now is in a position where they can start to call these guys up and have them contribute. I don't think they felt, Goldobin did get a chance last year, but I think that was, more out of necessity with Couture going down. They needed a high skill player to fill that role. And whereas now it's like, okay, we need we need some kind of a spark, and they have the young players that can do that and maybe, push the guys to play a little more. So, it's going to be very interesting to see how Labanc's used, where he slides in. I think you could make the argument that he could slide on any of those lines, really. I mean, I think he could play with Couture, he could play with Hurdle. I could absolutely see that. Definitely could see him playing with Tierney. And like you said, you could even see him playing with the Joes, even if it is a two righty situation like with Joel Ward. So, it's going to be kind of fascinating to see how the usage goes. Do you think he's going to play tomorrow night?
I think if he does play tomorrow night, he plays on the fourth line because that's where he has some experience and will get fewer minutes. So, maybe he will. I feel like he should. I don't think that he needs more than a morning skate to get reintegrated into the way the fourth line is working. Or if he does, then maybe they should have made this move 2 days ago.
Right.
And so my thinking being that they don't think he needed that extra practice day, that he's going to be good to go. Because if they thought that, they would have just done it. I don't think they made this decision at midnight last night,
No, I think they wanted him to play in the Barracudas game yesterday, and he scored.
Correct.
And they wanted him to get that game experience. So
that game experience is more valuable than skating with the Sharks yesterday, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, the Sharks yesterday, a lot of their work was, neutral zone stuff they, back checking with speed and handling, speed coming into their defensive zone. A lot of it seemed to stem, from that Penguins game. So, it's going to be, I agree with you. I think he'll probably slide in on that fourth line tomorrow. My question is, does Nieto play or does Wingels play? Because Wingels was a late scratch against the Penguins. I'm not sure if it was injury related. I didn't see anything that either confirmed or denied that. But Nieto played and so did Haley. Does he go in over Wingels or does he go in over Nieto? Or I don't think he's going to play Micheal Haley and Kevin Labanc together on the fourth line. If he does play Micheal Haley and Kevin Labanc, I think you see Nieto and wait, I probably did the math wrong. No, probably Nieto come out, Wingels stays on the fourth line, and then Labanc comes in maybe for Melker Karlsson. Although I don't think Karlsson's poorly enough to get scratched lately.
Yeah. I mean, I think
actually been really good lately.
Yeah, and I think that DeBoer likes Karlsson a lot too. You'll note that he hasn't been talked about a whole lot, which is usually a good sign. I think in my ideal world, you scratch Haley and you play Nieto, Tierney, and Labanc on that fourth line.
And scratch Wingels too? Yeah,
absolutely. But to me, that's a no-brainer because now you have a guy that can actually score in Labanc. Nieto's a great possession player, and Tierney's solid. He's not obviously even in this conversation. Nieto's a better player than Wingels is. And that's that. Is that what's going to happen? I don't know. I also think that fits with the handedness, right? Because Nieto would play the left, right? So, whereas Wingels would play the right, I believe. So, right?
Yeah. Wingels is a right winger. Yep, he's right.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know. That seems like the more natural thing to do because I'm not opposed to the idea of playing guys on their offside, especially more veteran dudes. But I'm certainly not going to play Kevin Labanc on his offhand in his first NHL game. That would be just foolhardy.
Yeah.
So if it's up to me, that's what I do. I play the Nieto, Tierney, Labanc line and see what happens. Because I really do think that if you have a guy like a Tierney that's a solid, a good fourth line center, you have a guy like Nieto who plays a good possession game, who can help you get the puck out of your zone and into the neutral zone, and then a guy like Labanc that is an elite scorer. That's a pretty good mix for really any line, and I think that's a good mix for a fourth line, especially.
Yeah, I think that's got the opportunity to score some goals.
Especially because I don't think the Capitals' fourth line is anything to get excited about. I think they play a pretty heavy fourth line, at least traditionally. I couldn't speak to this year. I haven't looked at them too closely yet. So that's what I
agree. I think that's got the formula to work. He did play with Nieto too, according to Natural Stat Trick. They played a little over 10 minutes together in the preseason. So he's got some familiarity with those guys. Really the only other NHL forward he has, more familiarity with than Nieto is Tomas Hertl. The rest of his most common line mates that are forwards, Goldobin, Carpenter, guys that are playing with the Barracuda right now. So it's gonna be interesting to see. I think there's a good chance we'll see the kid make his NHL debut on election night, no less,
in our nation's capital. Wow.
Yeah.
As if the night couldn't get any bigger.
Yeah.
So I think this is kind of exciting. I'm excited to see what they do going forward here, and then obviously I'll have some stuff up on what I think the Sharks need to do as far as a roster standpoint at some point here in the next couple of days, because that's that needs to be addressed probably pretty darn soon. I know obviously they're under the cap now, but it's so tight that they're going to want to give themselves a little bit of room here.
I think it's going to all depend on how Labanc plays, because if he's not great, they'll send him back down after the road trip. No harm, no foul. But if he is very good, then you've got to crunch. And, like you said, if they waived any of Nieto, Wingels, and DeMello, especially DeMello, I think would get claimed in a heartbeat.
No problem.
He'd probably be able to play. I was talking with Zach, who writes for he's like a prospects writer for the Sharks. He was at the practice yesterday, Zach Devine. He's saying that, DeMello can probably play a lot of minutes for almost every other team in the division defensively other than the Sharks, because a lot of them are really struggling defensively.
The only guy who wouldn't get claimed in that scenario to me is Wingels.
Too much money, I think, on the deal.
Way too much money. So, so I assume that if they waive him, they're still eating a bunch of that cap hit, so that's not really a great scenario either, because I don't think they could just bear – well, certainly they can't bury the entire cap hit. I don't know how much of it they'd be able to bury.
They'd be able to bury 1.25, so I think half of his deal. I think that's the max.
That's not nothing.
Sorry, $925,000 is the max that they can bury.
Okay,
so
right.
And he's still be on their cap.
Two and a quarter, 2.5. Yeah,
he's 5.
Yeah, that's – Jesus God. Overpaying fourth liners is an epidemic that needs to be stopped.
When he signed it, he was not, he wasn't.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're right.
Role. His decline has been, probably quick and a bit of a problem for the Sharks.
No kidding.
Lately.
So, right. So let's talk a little bit about I already touched on it because that's why Labanc is here. But Sharks got their butts kicked pretty good on Saturday. Really just got embarrassed. And that's I guess from just a hockey standpoint, it's, whatever, you're going to lose games, you're going to lose some games in embarrassing fashion. But the fact that they had already lost back-to-back games in regulation against crappy teams, they came into that game really needing a win from a PR morale standpoint, and they got literally the opposite of what they were looking for. What did you see in that game that, a takeaway that's something maybe we can, learn about the Sharks from that contest?
Oh man, I think, I don't know. I think a big thing there was just some of the sloppiness that's hurt them this season just really came to the forefront and really came to fruition in that game. Didn't think they played a terrible first period. I thought they were actually, pretty good for the most part. They were down 2-0, but it wasn't a 2-0 deficit where you're like, okay, they're screwed. That
Especially
third
because
goal,
we were down 1-0 for most of the period, and I thought they actually had a pretty good chance to get back into the game, and then they give up that second goal, and that was kind of a bummer because they felt they played well enough to be really in the game. I agree.
And then I think the third goal was just a backbreaker, and that's one. Yeah. They won't say it. They haven't said it. I don't know if Martin Jones will say it because he's pretty coy and pretty just straight shooter. But that's that third goal is one that I think he wants to have back. Bad turnover, but again, it's sloppiness. A bad turnover by Vlasic, like right to Crosby in front of the net. That's even if it was a bit of a weak shot, that's a place you don't want to turn the puck over. Then the shorthanded goal they got beat on. They were. I was not at the game, but watching some of the post game quotes and hearing what the players had to say. Logan Couture, as usual, very frank in his criticism about what happened, and I tend to agree with him. It seemed more not like he characterized it as effort, and I wouldn't say that they weren't trying. I don't think he's saying that either, but I think it was a lot of sloppy mistakes that he said too, and I agree with that. I don't think the Penguins, the sloppiness ended up helping them dominate, but it didn't seem like a game where the Penguins were firing on all cylinders and they were at their best. It felt like a game where they were kind of given, opportunities. It honestly kind of felt a little bit like, some of the games that the Sharks, some of the games of the Cup final that the Sharks led in, at Game 5, they took advantage of some sloppiness from the Penguins, took a lead going into the second period. Unlike that game, it wasn't Matt Murray standing on his head. It was the Sharks continuing to be sloppy, as opposed to Martin Jones standing on his head while the Penguins really turned it on. So I think, nothing too concerning about it. It was a bad loss. I'm sure. I really don't get the sense that the opponent made it worse for them. I think they both teams really downplayed the whole, Stanley Cup rematch thing. I think it's probably because the teams see each other so infrequently and because a lot of them, 4 of the Sharks played with Sidney Crosby over the summer. I think any animosity, so to speak, from that kind of died down, and any, residual feelings died down. But I think just the nature in which they lost, and you allow, 5 goals, and they're all, each of those goals are not a result of, wow, they just made like a really good play. I think there are people at fault on each of them, and but that kind of stuff happens, and it's game 12 of the season, so I think it's ultimately too early to be concerned. But that's going into a road trip on a 3-game losing streak as opposed to going on a road trip having won that game 7-5. It's a big difference, and it still is early, but we're a couple weeks away from that cutoff point where teams that are in playoff positions tend to stay. So the urgency, I think, for the road trip certainly increases a bit after losing that game, because you lose tomorrow in Washington, you're under 500.
Right, and I think a big thing is that Martin Jones has really just not played well this year at all.
Yeah,
and I try not to look too much into the way that he's playing as far as me, using my eyes, because I'm not a goalie coach, I'm not a goalie, a scout, so. But I know that one of his biggest problems is that he can be a little, I don't want to say lazy, but lazy getting back to seal that post. And you saw that on that bank shot, and you see it on all of those short side goals he allows. It's because he waits too long to get over. And this is something I talked about with an actual goalie coach, Greg Malik, who you guys should follow on Twitter because he's great. He sometimes doesn't come over and seal up the post on his left side. That is a huge, huge problem for him. And that's something that Greg pointed out to me to begin with. And since then, it's like I can't not notice it every single time it happens. And, I did that post about, the Sharks needing more from Martin Jones. A lot of those goals against are coming from that little spot that is not a scoring area over to his left, over near the faceoff dot. And, part of that is that Martin Jones just needs to play better. And part of that, too, is that, hey, listen, this has been the story for a season and a half. It's time for the Sharks defenders to figure it out. Hey, let's maybe try to, prevent shots from that area. That's their job. And I know, again, while the Sharks have allowed a very small number of shots, they're allowing a disproportionate number of scoring chances to the number of shots. And I think that that's kind of a problem. And that goes back to the sloppiness. I know you mentioned Vlasic on that first goal, I believe it was. And him and Braun.
Was it the first or the third?
Third goal, yeah. Sorry, no, you're right. Yeah, you're right. They got just victimized by the Penguins, Vlasic and Braun did. They got embarrassed. And that they should be embarrassed because those are the guys that are supposed to go out there and, get it done against the top guys. And, they showed they're not those guys, or they weren't on Saturday. They just weren't. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we know that you guys are getting the tough minutes, but that's why you're getting the tough minutes, Exactly. And so I feel like it's not really anything that's changed so much as that it's just they're making these really silly errors that seem to be burning them just every single time. And it becomes more of a focal point because the team's not scoring, of course. So
exactly. If you're not scoring goals at the other end, those errors are magnified.
Right. So it's only 12 games, and I'm not really concerned about the team going forward. It's just kind of frustrating. It's one thing to go into a game, both teams play well, and, another team makes a really good play, and, whatever. Like, the losing in the Stanley Cup final wasn't really all that frustrating to me because I felt like, oh, no, the Penguins are just better. That's how it goes, okay? They're a better team, and the Sharks didn't deserve to win. That's fine. I have no problem losing to a better team that when you get outplayed. But watching games like that one where it's like you're not in the game not because the Penguins are better, but because you're playing stupid, It's just not – it's different playing poorly and playing stupidly, and they've played – a lot of stupid games, and that's a little more frustrating. Try not to overreact to any of it because, I don't think it's going to be a long-term problem, but it's like, come on, guys, let's show that we learned something from the long playoff run, and let's, take the games a little more seriously and make fewer mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's been really other than that Detroit loss, I don't think they've truly been outplayed, like dominated and had the other team control play in any of their losses. It's been sloppiness. The Rangers game, sloppy mistakes. Third period against the Penguins, uncharacteristically sloppy. Two dominant periods, and then the worst period they've played all season. Still, even though they were not great in the second period on Saturday, I still think that third period against the Penguins is the worst they've played all season. Sloppy in the second period against Arizona. Sloppy in the second period again against Calgary. Brent Burns talked about it after the Calgary loss. You let teams with high-end skill, and, a lot of these teams, Calgary certainly has high-end skill. Pittsburgh certainly has high-end skill. Even Arizona has a good collection of pretty skilled players. The Rangers, we're seeing that so far this year. You let teams hang around like that, and if you're not at your best defensively, you're gonna get bitten, especially if you're not scoring. You're scoring in the offensive end. So I agree with you. It's definitely, I think, can be frustrating to watch from a fan's perspective. But I think, the stuff you said about Jones too is interesting. Was he saying that, when Jones is sliding laterally to his blocker side, he gets beaten?
To his left-hand side, yeah. So that's his glove side.
So is that his glove? Is that his glove? Okay. Yeah. Okay. Because, I noticed, you think about that, you notice that I think even goals where he's been beaten 5-hole, like that the goal Kachuk scored was to his left. That 5-hole goal was to his left. Crosby, he was sliding to his left. And then the Crosby first goal, he did not seal the post when Crosby was behind the net, and Crosby threw it in off of him, off of the gate, and yes, that's fluky. And, as DeBoer put it, Sidney Crosby is the only player in the world who can score 2 goals without actually shooting the puck. Like, so other than maybe Joe Thornton, if he gets two empty breakaways, he gets tripped. But that to me, that's an interesting point. And now that you've said it and that the goalie coach said it, that's something I kind of can't unsee either. I think that Crosby first goal is directly a result of not sealing the post. So Jones had his struggles last year, and I'm really not sure how much of it is him starting so many games, because I was looking at the game log and trying to see how many, if he started a lot of games, were there a lot of bad games later on, and there were some in the middle, some at the beginning. I think he just hasn't been at his best to start the season, and he was at his best in the postseason. So I don't think anybody expected him to be in postseason form this early, but I think they were certainly expecting him to be league average. I don't think he hasn't been. I don't think he's been that at all.
He's been worse than Peter Budaj this year. So
That's fun.
It's not great.
That's not
now.
no.
That being said, I went and looked at his rolling save percentage average. He's still in a better place now than he was last December when he really, was struggling. It's not a perfect comparison because last December the Sharks were so injury bitten that it was just a kind of a crappy team without a lot of really good players, obviously. So, but I think another thing to point out is the fact that Aaron Dell came in, relieved Jones, and also looked pretty crappy. In fairness, the whole team did. It was a bad game, and so I would not make any big conclusions from that game. But it's, you'd really like to have seen Dell come in and shut them out the rest of the way. So at least now the Sharks wouldn't be able to say, they'd have a reason to play him again, going forward. And now it's kind of like, okay, right, so we're going to play Jones the next 8 games. That's great. That's fine.
That's such a tough ask of Dell, too, though, especially because
absolutely.
The goal was so early in the second period that, he can't, if they'd gone into the intermission and said, Dell, you're starting, he can kind of get into that, get into a mindset. No, he's starting. He's sitting on the bench to start the second period. All of a sudden, DeBoer looks down the bench and says, you're in. I talked to him yesterday. He said, I was definitely wasn't expecting to play against the Penguins. So, he still does his preparation as if he's starting every night. But that's got to be jarring. It's exactly. It's got to be jarring when the coach looks down the bench at you and says, "Okay, you're going in now." So
against one of the best teams in the league. All right, Godspeed, kid.
In your second appearance, yeah. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see when he starts too on this trip, because this we talked about this yesterday a little bit. This first 3-game stretch of the road trip is as brutal as any you could ask. I mean, Washington, Florida, Tampa Bay. I don't know if it's in that order. I know Washington's first, but man, I mean, I know Florida struggled this year, and Yager's hurt, unfortunately, so we won't get to see him unless he comes back for that game. But Tampa's rolling. Stamkos looks great. Washington is Washington, so that's a daunting stretch. And I if they weren't going to trust him to play against Arizona or Calgary in those games, I can't imagine him playing against any of those 3 teams to start the road trip.
This is going to be a scary road trip. It's not going to be a whole lot of fun, to be honest, unless they really figure out the whole scoring thing here pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that being said, I mean, I really don't feel like there's a team the Sharks can play against this year that they're not, that I wouldn't pick them against. So it's not really, it should feel a lot better if they'd beaten Arizona and Calgary. That I guess probably goes without saying. But it's like, okay, it's not great. It's not great. But the good news is that I think that this Kevin Labanc call-up is going to be good, and I think that the team is going to respond pretty well to this losing streak, because they usually do. And quite frankly, even if none of it's related, it would not surprise me at all if the Sharks shoot 20% on this stupid road trip, and everyone talks about how Kevin Labanc energized the team and they're competing now, and whatever. There's going to be a lot of correlation, causation bullshit over the next week. It would be my guess. So it'll be interesting to see what actually happens. I'm really curious to see how Labanc plays and where he ends up playing.
Yeah, that's the big storyline. That's going to be. It's going to be really fun to see how he's used and see where he's used and see if he sticks beyond this road trip. He's going to have, if he impresses against, the bright news for him is if he impresses against these good teams, like it's going to be.
He's going to stick around if he has a good road trip. If he plays well in these 3 games, in my opinion. I mean, there's no reason to send him back, at that level, because it's going to be kind of a tough decision as far as what they're going to do otherwise, but not that tough. It's not going to be that tough.
It's a good problem to have for them.
Absolutely.
If he forces their hand and he's NHL ready right now, 10 games into his professional career, I thought, they're going to take that and any roster headache it causes at this point. So it's, we don't want to hype up Kevin Labanc too much, but if he's not the Sharks savior after these 6 games, then hope is lost, right? Is that
I think that is
official editorial stance?
Yeah, right. That's our editorial stance. Right. Because we are the San Jose Barracuda experts more so than anyone else. Nobody else knows what they're talking about. Us.
No, so it's gonna be exciting to see for sure. I think I stand by it. I think he's probably the prospect I've been most excited to see for the Sharks since Logan Couture got called.
I don't think I would have.
I don't think I would have, Goldobin maybe last year I was excited to see, but this surpasses it. And I think I would not have been saying that unless he had the preseason that he did. So he's moved onto the radars of a lot of people, this website included. So it's going to be very exciting to see what he can do.
All right. So maybe we'll do another one of these on Friday again, we'll see how the Labanc mania goes. Hopefully he does play tomorrow, because I would assume there's a pretty good chance his parents will be able to show up for that game if he does. Given that he's a Brooklyn kid. So I assume that they'll show up regardless if he plays or not, but it would be pretty cool for him to be able to get to play in front of his parents for his NHL debut. But, hey, tickets to Florida, not that expensive. It's a wonderful time to be in Florida.
Yep.
As wonderful a time as there can be to be in Florida, I guess, would be the asterisk on the – anyway, it's not important. I love Florida and all of our Floridian friends. All right, so that'll do it for us. So we've got a bunch of stuff on the site, and we'll have more Kevin Labanc stuff and more kind of Sharks-oriented Kevin Labanc stuff as far as how roster stuff moves around before then. So you can follow me on Twitter at Jake Sundstrom and at Fear the Fin. Marcus is at Marcus P. White.
I am.
He is. Oh, hey, there were a couple of questions I'm supposed to answer, actually. Hold on.
Let's do it. Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. I got, I think, 3 emails, so hold on. We're gonna answer all of these. Loading up email machine. Let's see. Oh my God! Oh, they're mentioning goals for percentage or expected goals. Wow, this is highbrow stuff for this podcast. Okay, hang on. Let me get out my calculator. I'm ready. Okay, let's see. The first question is from Larry McCurtis. He asked about who stuck out as bad and good in the blowout. We kind of talked about that already. As far as the top defensive pairing being bad and nobody was good. I think that would be fair to say. I don't. If you lose 5-0 or whatever, I don't know if anybody can be good.
Yeah, I don't. I think nobody really played that well. If they had, I don't. They wouldn't have lost 5-0. Yeah, that was a collectively bad game, I think, for sure.
Right. His next question is, secondly, the Sharks' PDO being dead last in the league this morning, but their expected goals for is projected as second. Do you think we'll see a storm of goals in the next weeks? It just seems like there has to be a breaking point soon. Well, technically, I hope so, I guess is my answer. No, there's not like, it doesn't really work that way where it's like, oh, you've been unlucky for so long and now you're all of a sudden going to be lucky again. It doesn't really work that way. The Sharks could continue to be this unlucky literally until the end of time. It could happen. Not likely, but it could happen.
Yeah, it could be you were expecting them to regress to the mean, but it could be a seasonal slump. We've seen teams done in by a low, on-ice shooting percentage before and a low save percentage. I think, though, that I would expect, even if the the shooting percentage is low, I expect that save percentage to regress like pretty soon. Like Martin Jones is just too good of a goalie to play at that level for the whole season. Will it happen on this week or this part of the road trip? That I'm not sure. They're playing 3 really, really good teams, but they do close the road trip with Carolina, St. Louis, and Arizona. They've already lost to Arizona, so you can't overlook the Coyotes. But Carolina's a team that's not gotten great goaltending this year, and I haven't looked at the numbers on Jake Allen so far this season, but their Sharks were able to score on St. Louis last year with Brian Elliott in net, and he was a substantially better goaltender. So I think there's going to be an opportunity for them to kind of play at their normal, return to normalcy, if you will. But with slumps like this, you really never know. Right.
So we already answered the next question. This is from Caleb Pitts at the most Caleb on Twitter. When do you think someone from the Barracuda will get the bump up? And on the flip side, who do you think will then get sent down? Well, the answer is Kevin Labanc. Called it. Nobody got sent down yet. And
I think the only person who gets sent down is Tierney. I think he's the only other person who's who is waiver exempt, I mean.
Correct. The wording is terrible, but he's not waiver eligible.
Yeah.
I hate it so much. Yeah. Right. So there we go. Called it. Nailed it. Doug Wilson's reading Fear the Fin and making roster decisions based on it.
Solely on our input.
Whew! Got him again.
Yeah.
You are welcome, Dougie. My phone is here and I'm ready. I'm ready for my phone call.
You on one of his 4.
Exactly. Right. One of his. I assume he has 4 Motorola Razors, all in different colors.
Have you seen that? You've seen that picture of him at the draft from a few years ago, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
When he has one cell phone in his hand and another on the outside, and then he has like the desk phone. It's just like unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, listen, he's a very smart man. He just hasn't figured out conference calls yet. He's going to get there. Group calling is a difficult thing. I assume him and Brian Sabian shopped at the same place. I think my favorite all-time Brian Sabian photo is him on his Razor at a San Jose Giants game eating frozen yogurt, just doing what he does. I assume that's a similar thing, and they hang out and stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, that is a movie I would pay $8 to see. Absolutely. All right. We've gotten off topic, but that's all of the questions that I got in my email, so that's fine. You can always welcome to submit more questions if you have them, and we'll use them on a future podcast or whatever. So that's it. We're done, guys.